their name into the screen during your post either. To get the best view, click on the top right-hand side of your screen and click on speaker view. You'll be able to see our two presenters on top, along with the PowerPoint presentation underneath. And I want to take a moment to say thank you all for those guys who are joining us today. Here's a list of the people who are signed up and attending today. All right. With that, Sean, I didn't get to introduce you, so I'm going to stop sharing. I'll let you present and introduce yourself. Thanks, Sean.
Fantastic. Thank you, Tony. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, depending on where in the world you are at. I'm Sean. The way I describe myself, I'm a really passionate resource as it pertains to cybersecurity. Surprisingly, after all these years, I've been in the industry for about 25 years, got my start going to 2,600 meetings way back in the day. But today, I'm the Senior Vice President of our Security Programs Division. It's an easy story to tell. I run the red team, and I run the blue team. So kind of a dream job of mine, very lucky to be where I'm at. And I'm very excited to share some of the topics that we're going to be discussing here today. Application security is such a critical component to an organization's security posture. And today we're going to be talking about a lot of relevant considerations and observations moving forward. As Tony mentioned, this session is being recorded, be available on demand in the next couple of days. And before we begin, I want to thank our sponsor. So thank you to Check Point for sponsoring this presentation. We appreciate it. All right, so we kind of did a little informal introductions, but it is certainly my honor to introduce my colleague and co-presenter, Andrew Krull here. Andrew, do you want to give yourself any more of an intro than you did earlier? Maybe just a little quick 20, 30-second, overview?
Yeah, for those who didn't see it, I guess I'll make it quick. I'm a senior application security consultant here at CBI. Been here just over 3 years now. Started as a developer in the late 90s. And just kind of been developing and working through the process for since then. In 2013-14, moved into the security realm. Have several GIAC certifications and my OSWE as well. And looking forward to sharing some web exploit stuff with you guys. And it's not always the most exciting stuff, but to me it is. So hopefully I can bring you some of my joy.
That's awesome. You missed Jedi Knight consultant and overall great guy. Anyways, thank you very much, Andrew. All right, moving on to our agenda here today. This is what we're going to be covering. Obviously, a pretty well-rounded discussion on application security. We'll talk about some of the top threats that we observe in the field. We're going to keep this a little strategic and tactical. We're going to talk about some of the strategies and the recommendations and the things that we should be doing. But Andrew's going to share some tactical cool stuff, some observations that we see in the field, some exploits, and essentially what that amounts to. When we capitalize on a vulnerability or an exploit, what's the output? We're going to walk through some of these considerations and lessons learned. We're going to talk through what we don't see enough of and what we wish we did see more of. And then we'll round things out with some recommendations, a little discussion on cloud, and then we'll open it up for a more informal Q&A. All right, I love this quote. This is a good quote. We wanted to start off with more or less a backdrop of what's happening with technology trends and why application security needs to not sort of evolve, it needs to evolve to meet today's needs. Software is eating the world. Every company will become a software company. Many people in this room may feel that you're a software company today. This is from Mark Anderson. He's a venture capitalist, big VC guy. The quote is almost 10 years old, all right? So the thing is that many companies now have hundreds of apps, right? And really are thinking like software companies. We have apps that customers interface with. We have apps that employees interface with, vendors, partners, supply chain entities, you name it. Software is key, and they're driving, these applications are driving the way that we do business. And as such, they're introducing risks that some of us have awareness on and are just looking for some insight. In other cases, people have no idea, no awareness of these risks and what the impact is that it presents to your organization. Transformation at warp speed. Yes, applications are everywhere and everyone is online. I think certainly the pandemic, dramatically accelerated the pace of this digital transformation we went through, expanding the scale of off-premise plans, the shift to a more robust workforce. It just fueled the necessity of delivering our technologies through applications, right? And software is pretty much how we interact. It's the technology interface and will continue to be moving forward in, again, a very accelerated way. More and more software is being built more than ever. The rush to production with these applications is at an unprecedented level. And I just kind of sit back and think, just with the pandemic, how many of you may have scheduled your vaccine via a web app or a mobile app? Probably a lot of you, right? It just kind of, I think, puts things into perspective. All right, I want to talk a little bit next about the attack surface expansion. And this is important to understand. There's a lot of risk with application security. I'm going to try to make it through this presentation without talking about ransomware here. That's going to be a tough part. But there are many threat actors taking advantages of these web application vulnerabilities. The app layer continues to be one of the most attacked layers and the hardest to defend. That's important. The defense mechanisms, the ones that we are so used to working so efficiently and effectively, just not applicable here in most cases. It takes a completely revolutionized level of thinking to get the security level that we're looking for. According to the Verizon Data Breach Investigations Report, not the one that's supposed to be released tomorrow, but the one that was released last year, almost half, 43% of data breaches are the result of application vulnerabilities. Might shoot myself here, but I think with that release report tomorrow, you might see a little bit more of a focus on the AppSec side of things and the inherent connection to the cloud. I'm certainly looking forward to that and look for some information on us regarding that. But why do these apps present risk to organizations? Because the attackers can do so many things, right? First of all, they can use it as a platform to gain access to further entities or assets in the environment, right? They get some remote code execution on this app server. Then they start moving laterally, escalating privileges, all that bad stuff. It also is generally a very, a vault of data, of critical sensitive data. So beyond using this server as a platform to continue to hack in the environment, just gaining access through the database through something like SQL injection can be detrimental. All right. So we see these attacks also beginning to be used in delivering malware and being used as kind of a broker, if you will, in distributing and disseminating malware. So these attacks can be sophisticated and cause a lot of impact quickly. And we see it firsthand. Organizations depend on applications to run or support their business, but they're not doing enough to validate and reinforce application security. We see some of the apps that are most vulnerable being first and foremost homebrewed, custom developed apps. By far, we have a need to build an app. Oh, Johnny used to do, web development back in the day. Let's get him to build this thing, right? Sometimes that's how it happens, right? Now, enterprise firms or more mature firms might have, an internal development team with robust SDLC practices, but it's still a thing. Is these homebrewed apps are very risky. And apps that are developed by software development firms that don't have security as a core focus, we see that a lot, along with apps with critical data. All right, next up. This is the fun part, I think. All right, so in a moment here, I'm going to pass it over to Andrew to talk through some of these observations that we see in the field. And we're going to talk about what it is, what is an authorization issue, and then what is the output, right? What happens as a result of exploiting an authorization issue or password reset weaknesses or outdated vulnerable third-party libraries. Great icon with the third-party libraries and outdated. I just got it. Took me a while. Anyways, all right, Andrew, I'll kick it over to you, sir.
All right. So yeah, these are the three that we came up with to present in the time we had here, but there are so many more. It was hard to pick it. We're going to try to give you guys a little overview of what we're finding out there and what things I like to exploit, that show some critical stuff that, and I try to give you a little screenshots here of a follow through of it as well. So let's start off with the authorization issues first. All right, so authorization issues, what is it? Parameter tampering, forced browsing, no authorization, that's kind of what I'm looking at here. Parameter tampering, the first screenshot here is a classic example of parameter tampering. I see this all the time. A lot of times it's in older applications, newer applications that have security in mind. I don't see this as much. So you can see their ID equals 3406. I mean, if you see this in your GET request, I mean, I see this if I'm just doing something on my personal level, buying something in a shopping cart or something like that, and I see something like that, I automatically want to decrement that by 1 just to see what's going on. I see this a lot of time in shopping carts where they say your receipt number is 1234. And I have to do 1233. I just have to see if it, they restrict that. So anytime I see this, I almost know that there's something there somewhere in this application if they're using this. Not always, but it's definitely a telltale sign, and you're going to get people trying to attack this more often if you do something like this. I always recommend doing something like a GUID, something that's kind of random, nothing you can increment. It's not something that somebody can brute force either. That's going to take them forever. So as you can see, what the result of this is, if I just increment or decrement this on the left side of that screenshot, you can see the payload. Those are all the numbers I tried in there, and you can see I came back with email addresses of other users, first names, last names, usernames. That to me is a gold mine. If I was an attacker here that was actually, not a good guy attacker, I would be using this for a spear phishing attack, something that I could use that username. I know what they're connecting to. I know this application. Not only that, I see their username there, and that is critical there as well. One thing that did not make this slideshow that I was on the edge with, I call it like my triple threat. That is user enumeration, which I have here, no account lockout, and weak password policy, whether that be the length, complexity, no expiration. If I have all 3 of those things in an application, especially when they give me an unauthenticated web app test, more than likely I'm going to probably get into that application. And I do that all the time by, if I can enumerate the user, I can brute force the password because there's no account lockout and the password is weak, I'm going to get into that application. And then from there on, you won't know what I'm doing because I'm authenticated as a valid user, and that's very hard to track. So you see this one vulnerability here, it could lead to so much more things. The back screenshot there, if you could see, is kind of blurred out there in the back as well. We kind of hide some of the stuff there. There's some sensitive information in that mortgage interest statement, such as social security numbers, names, addresses. And if you look at the top there, it's another thing where they increment. We have some incrementing numbers there that, I mean, obviously the first thing I seen when I seen that was I just try to brute force all of those numbers and get all that data back. The second problem I saw there was the no authorization. If this was actually accessed through the application, so a cookie was sent with it, but I actually pulled the cookie out and tried again, and I could see that I could access this without any authorization whatsoever. The biggest problem with that one now is that this was a GET request. There's nothing else in there that's doing any kind of authorization whatsoever. So you'll see this GET URL, it's saved in the browser. You start typing it in, it gets auto-populated. If this is a shared computer, if it's a shared Wi-Fi, this URL is going to be saved in logs. It's going to be saved in other places. This is a dangerous thing. Not many people check these type of things here, but I mean, that's one of the things I do if I go to a shared computer. I always I hit that down button on the browser to see where people have been. I don't know why. Maybe other people do that as well, but it may show some of these type of things in there. So something to definitely watch out for. The point I want to make on this slide is definitely do not trust your users to handle the security for you. If you have something in there where you have somebody clicking on their profile and it brings them to this ID equals 3406, don't trust them to only follow the navigation menus. They're going to manipulate stuff. Always validate on the back end what they're having access to and only allow what they're allowed to have access to.
Hey, Andrew, we have a private chat question for you. The question is, we work very closely with our marketing organization, but the marketing team uses an outside vendor. How do we enforce this type of security to that vendor, to the solutions that they're building?
I've got it. We're going to address that question, I think, later on, but it's basically having a set of requirements that you dictate need to be in place when you're working with these vendors. Attestation that they're, conducting manual tests like this, an understanding that they're leveraging a framework like OWASP, the Open Web Application Security Project, just basically some best practices and some checks to say, are you doing the right things? Andrew, anything you want to add to that?
Nope, I think that's great. I see a lot of times people want proof that they actually had a pen test done or something to prove that their application's secure. So yeah, those type of things are always good.
And Andrew, I know you want to move on to misconfiguration, but I would just real quickly, parameter tampering, it is a big deal. I think it's like one of the biggest things that we find and relatively easy to fix. But recently, it was last year, Panera Bread, they had this vulnerability on their order tracking system. I have seen, just maybe much like yourself, as I'm doing like a pizza order, I've seen the pizza trackers, same thing, you know, just some simple sequential UID. I can see where the pizza tracking, and there's many more detrimental items, but yeah, parameter tampering, certainly a big deal. Feel free to proceed, Andrew.
All right. Yep. So the next one we got here is MFA weaknesses. I won't say this is like I see this all the time, but when I do see it, it is detrimental, and that's why I want to definitely show this for everybody. So what am I talking about? I'm talking about just not requiring MFA on sensitive functions. So what's a sensitive function to me is updating profile information such as your username, your email address, your telephone number, these type of things where they can contact you or do other kind of MFA functions. I would like to see some kind of secondary check. If we go back to the authorization where we were looking at parameter tampering, if I have something where I can edit, if I can go to edit profile ID 3406 and I try to do a email update through that, if I have an MFA in place, it's going to stop me. And I've seen that before where actually they had a parameter tampering function where I could do a post to update something in their profile, and it prevented me from doing that. So obviously that's a problem. They shouldn't allow that, but the MFA was their saving grace there. Privileged users as well. If you guys have an administrative interface that's exposed externally, or administrators have access to the same one that regular users have, they can get into. The same thing with the brute forcing of trying to get to it. I mean, exposed credentials are always coming out, data breaches, things like that. You never know if someone's going to be guessing your password or they get it some other way through a phishing attack. Having that MFA is going to stop the majority of those type of attacks there, and it's definitely going to slow people down if it's implemented correctly, which brings me to my next point, which is bad implementations are just as bad or worse than no implementation at all. And what I mean by that, let's look at the first example here. I was actually testing out an unauthenticated web app test, and they had the triple threat where I was able to get in, and I think I ran it overnight. I was trying to brute force some passwords. I came back the next morning and I saw that I had like 5 or 6 accounts I had access to. And I signed into one of them and I got this back and I'm like, oh man, I got MFA here. And you can see, it's kind of hard to see, but kind of easy to see that there's some asterisks in there. They don't show you the phone number, just the last 4 digits. But if I actually looked at the response from the application, it was actually responding back with that asterisk name and phone number, but it also included the full phone number for that. And I was like, well, that's really weird. So I just, for the heck of it, I clicked send verification code, intercepted it, and it was sending through the full phone number back to the application. So I was like, well, let me put my phone number in there. And I did, and the application trusted my phone number being sent back to it and sent me the verification code. And I was able to get in and take over from there. Again, point of my whole slides here is don't trust your users. That's always my thing. Never trust your users to do the right thing. But yeah, definitely, this would have been one more check for the developer to put in there. It's a little bit extra work for them to do one more database call to pull back that phone number one more time, but it is definitely worth it here because this MFA was worthless at this point. The second screenshot I got here, it says requires 2-factor authentication. And then I see at the bottom there, phone ID GUID. So this was actually a mobile application, and just so you guys think, mobile applications, phones, not very, people can't really intercept and do much with that. That's not true. I can intercept data just as well in the phone application, a mobile application, and this is what I did. And I got into a user account, and it said requires 2-factor authentication. It did a similar thing to the screenshot in the top left, and you could see their masked phone number. It did the same thing. But when I actually went and clicked, send verification code or whatever it said in the mobile app, I intercepted it, and it actually came back and it was sending the GUID back. I'm like, oh man, well, I'm out of luck now. It's a GUID. But I was like, wait a second, this is a public application. I can create my own account, and I did. And I found out what my phone IDs were, and I replaced my phone ID with their phone ID, and now I'm bypassing that MFA as well. So just saying, Don't roll your own MFA if you don't have to. There's plenty of vendors out there that know how to do it. They've been through this. They've been tested. They know all these little things here. You may have a little hiccup here and there with trying to put this out. It may be a little cheaper. You may be able to have the functions to do it, but you might have a gotcha there, and you might be worthless altogether. So those are the points I want to point out in that one there. And I guess we can move on to password resets. All right, password resets. Non-expiring password reset links. I see this more than I'd like to see this. I click a password reset, I get an email, and it's this long GUID, random looking string, and I go ahead and change my password, and then I go and I click it again the next day and the next day and the next day, and it keeps lets me reset my password over and over and over again. That's really weird. That doesn't expire or nothing. And I'll click reset password again, and it'll send me a new link, and it's the same exact link. Those type of things are not good to have. If my password, my email ever gets compromised in any way, and our network pen tester side of it does it all the time, where they get into people's emails and test, they have that, and now they can reset a password and get another access to the corporation. So always make those expire, one-time use only. Next thing, easy to guess and easy to brute force security questions, birth dates, names, pins. Same thing I'm going to do is brute force accounts. I'm going to run overnight. I'm going to sit there and I'm going to run brute forcing of birth dates, names, PIN numbers. It won't stop a lot of people unless you have some kind of rate limiting in place there, some kind of CAPTCHA, something like that to kind of slow them down. Even then, those ones can get around. If it's a state actor or somebody that just has a lot of time on their hands, they're going to get around that rate limiting as well. I don't recommend that, to where if you put in your username, then it automatically prompts you to answer some security questions. I'm not a big fan of that. Those ones you can get around as well. I prefer a one-time email password reset link that's random and changes every time.
One thing too that I've seen, Andrew, I think we've seen as well, is being able to brute force the multi-factor authentication field as well too. And generally that's what, it's a 6-digit code. So running through a million sequential numbers is pretty quick. You can kind of get through that fairly fast. But yeah, does CAPTCHA have any preventative capabilities here, Andrew? Do you feel like there's value in any CAPTCHA technologies?
Yeah, definitely. I'm a big fan of CAPTCHA, and I recommend it all the time. As long as you implement it correctly and you actually validate the back end of it. I've seen it where the CAPTCHA just keeps the same. It validates it once, and then once you validate it one time, it ignores it after that and remembers.
Oh, no kidding.
And that one's just as bad. So yeah, those ones not good. Password reset links with incremental ID values. You saw that in parameter tampering. If you say my password reset where user ID equals 1, I'm going to put where user ID equals 2, 3, 4. Don't include that in there. Same thing with user names, where username equals J Smith. I'm going to try to brute force some user names in there as well. Then requiring a password reset but not enforcing it. That's always a good one. That we'll show that one here in the examples. The first example I have here, it looks like this is almost perfect password reset. I love this one. It's too bad that they had one little glitch in it. So if I go to do a password reset, you can see my user ID is a GUID. It's long, it's random. They include a reset token, which was in the URL. It was long, it was random. Every time it changed, I didn't see any problems with it. So I reset my password, send it through. But I pulled the reset token out and it worked still. So it wasn't even looking at that reset token. It was pointless. So if I could compromise a GUID of another user ID, I could reset anybody's password at this point, because that user ID is pretty much like a username at that point. So that was one bad way of a password reset. This middle section we have here is a reset password. I get a password reset link. I click on it. It presents me to reset my password, which is perfect. Everything's good there. I noticed on this one in particular where it sets a session ID cookie. And that's not a problem. I see that sometimes. That usually that cookie has no rights. It's just to authenticate enough to be able to, reset your password. But I see sometimes where it actually logs me in with my password reset link. So I never even have to change my password at that point. I could just force browse to my user profile page, and then I'm into the application. Never had to change my password at all. Again, this goes to if your email's ever compromised, or they could actually do a password reset, send it to you there, and then they can sign in as you and never even change your password. Nobody even knows that they were into your account. So if you can, do not authenticate the user till after they log in. And then the last one here, password expired, create a new password below. This one is awesome. I love this one. I love seeing this because I'm like, they're doing great. They're forcing a password reset. They're making sure these people are doing the right things. They're not using a stale password they've used for 5 years. But same as the top one, you're already signed in and they're not validating that your password has expired on every page. So what's happening is that now I can just force browse to my profile again. We talk about data breach dumps where users' credentials are dropped or email accounts compromised. If those passwords are compromised and they can get into these type of accounts, they won't have to change a password. Nobody's going to know they changed a password. Nobody knows they got to their account. These people may not have signed in for 6 months, a year, 6 years. Who knows? But their account's still out there. Their password's expired. They may still have a weak password. May have been a password from 2010 where it was password 123. One of those old ones that non-compliant with anything. So make sure if you do an expired password, validate on every page after that if their password's expired, send them right back to the password reset page. All right, use of vulnerable third-party libraries. I couldn't help myself but put this one in there. I see this all the time. What is this? Integrating third-party libraries and never updating them. We've all done this. It's so easy to use a third-party library. They have built-in functionality and everything. Why recreate the wheel, right? So you have all this functionality currently built in. Just continue to use it. Just pull it from another website, a jQuery or something like that, and use it. But these things, people are testing them all the time. They're always trying to find vulnerabilities in these things, and they're always coming out. It can be a pain trying to keep up with it, but it's definitely worth it. If we look at the example here, this is from a web app test we've done for a customer 2 years in a row. The first year we tested them, they were using this Teller library, which was outdated, and it had some vulnerabilities in it. And we let them know that it had a very high risk vulnerability where we could upload a random file to their servers. I don't know what their internal risk assessment identified for them or what happened with it to where it didn't get fixed. Once you can upload a file, that's all you could do. We couldn't do much more with it at that point. That was the only vulnerability that was found in this library. So the next year we did an assessment for them, and a new vulnerability came out right before we started assessing for them, and it allowed for that remote upload of any file and a deserialization attack, which allows you to do remote code execution. Now we got a problem because you can do two of those combined. We can upload whatever we want and we can execute it. As you can see on that very top screenshot, the first thing we did was use a Python script that was released as a proof of concept. As soon as this came available, people were running it all over the internet. It just does a sleep command. Bottom left there is what we got. It was a sleep for 10 seconds just to see if it's vulnerable. We got a response back in 10.62 seconds, which to us shows vulnerability. We played with it. We went 15 seconds, 22 seconds, just to make sure it wasn't a fluke. Then we uploaded our remote shell. And in the bottom right there, you can see we have our remote shell. We're in IIS app pool. It doesn't have like a specific service account that has huge rights to it. So that was good. But we did have a vulnerability that we were able to exploit to escape IIS app pool, and we became system rights, and we were able to pivot from there. So that one little vulnerability, that one little library that they didn't update at that one point in time can lead to a lot more, and this happens all the time. So my recommendation is always in your secure development lifecycle, document all the libraries you're currently using and make sure you know all the versions for them. Because if you see a new vulnerability coming out for jQuery 1.3.1 or whatever it is, you don't want to be rushing through trying to find, do we use this anywhere? Where do we use it? What application do we use it on? Maintain a library of all those third-party libraries that you use just so you could easily react to these type of situations. The next thing I got is referencing libraries from a third party and not verifying they're safe, unchanged. There's a vulnerability or a finding that we put in there called sub-resource integrity. It's missing on third-party scripts. It's just an integrity hash for scripts that you don't host, just to make sure they don't change. You can put that on for the ones that you do host as well. But there was, God, I can't remember the name of it now. There's a vulnerability going around that was people were attacking shopping carts. And what it was they were actually exploiting and getting access to some code from a third-party vendor that was being called on a shopping cart side, and they were putting their own code in there to pull out people's credit cards numbers. If they would have had this integrity check in place, they would have been able to prevent that. So if the new library that it was changed in such a way it doesn't match its hash anymore, the browser won't even load it anymore. So it's a great protection. Pretty much all of these big libraries that most people use are going to have a versioning system. So you're going to be calling a third-party library on a CDN that's going to be a /1.3.2 version / something else. So this integrity check, it shouldn't be causing any issues. It's not, because that library shouldn't be changing. It's a version release. So if you can implement that, definitely do that. It's going to protect you guys from any kind of third-party vulnerabilities that come out there.
Holy cow, Andrew. That was awesome. No matter how many times I hear this stuff, I am always so impressed with you and the AppSec crew that we have here. I feel like you guys could write a book. Maybe you will one day. But thank you very much for that, Andrew. That was a great job. Let's talk about what we need to do. All right, let's talk about setting your application security strategy. It is very much crawl, walk, run. And it is very much don't over-engineer it, all right? You got to start slow and get yourself to more of that world-class platform. It all starts with inventory. As you've heard with things like the CSC framework, inventory is first and foremost. You need to know what you have out there. And inventory should encompass a few things. It should encompass, what do we have on-prem? What do we have in the cloud? What kind of third-party libraries do we have going on? But it all starts with the inventory, because then you take the next step in being able to prioritize. All right. And so now we've got this long inventory and we have a pretty good sense of what's out there. Let's prioritize it. Well, how do we prioritize it? Well, there's a few variables that should be taken into consideration for prioritization. Number one, is it on-prem? Why is that important? Because of what Andrew just showed you, right? If we are able to, leverage some RCE, some remote code execution, and then use that to pivot to other systems, that's a big deal, and that should be a priority. You should look at the data, right? It's an easy one. Is there critical data on these systems? That should represent a priority. And then oftentimes too, we also look at authentication interfaces as a prioritized application as well. Whenever you see an authentication, portal or sequence or schema, you are interfacing with something. If this application server is sitting on-prem in your environment that has external exposure, is talking to your backend AD and authenticating through LDAP or something, that's a target, right? We're going to target that as malicious adversaries, with password spraying attacks and other things. So you need to prioritize your applications. And then once you do, you're starting to now gain a sense of your risk. All right. You are now able to provide better quantification as to what our top critical assets are. And now we can start in defining our strategy and how we go about, testing and building policies and a program, an actual, application security program that goes beyond the development, perspective and addresses things holistically. We've evaluated organizations that have thousands of applications externally exposed. And I'm not telling you it's easy, but I'm telling you it's possible. And you can notice and you can see the difference through measurable metrics and trying to better quantify that. But it takes first and foremost creating that inventory, prioritizing it. Then you can start understanding your risk and building the appropriate strategies. All right, some considerations and lessons learned that we've taken as a result of our observations in the field for so long, and also as a result of some of the things that we discussed here today. Input validation. All right, so input validation, I guess the easiest way to describe this is if you have a username and a password field, one should expect the only characters you're putting in there would be maybe, 12, 15 character max. There shouldn't be any special characters in there or ASCII characters. That's input validation, making sure that if somebody sends us a username and a password request, that we're validating that input and that we say, yes, that looks like a username, and yes, that looks like a password, and no, this looks like a SQL injection attempt, right? That is input validation. It still plays an instrumental role in application security because parameters and input fields are attacked as one of the first steps. Client-side validation. Andrew said it best: when you don't want to trust your users, we'll get to the ugly part there, but validation in general, validation done in the browser is called client-side validation, while validation done on the server side is called server validation or server-side validation. You always want to stress for server-side validation because on the client side, users can mess around with that stuff, as Andrew highlighted and showcased throughout his review there. So always push for server-side validation. And also, as Andrew mentioned, trusting users to do the right thing. We know how that goes, right? So let's really focus on that server-side validation. All right, things we don't see enough of that we wish we did, we really do. And first and foremost, it's rate limiting and throttling. What is rate limiting and throttling? It's basically governing how much traffic is allowed to and from our application. And there are easy ways to do this and there's hard ways to do this, but we don't see this enough. And rate limiting and throttling can make a huge impact on things like brute force attacks or probing for vulnerabilities against a certain parameter or a certain field. And a lot of this is possible with either, firewalls or web application firewalls or load balancers, things of that nature. Yes, it takes a little bit of time to understand what normal rates look like, but it's not impossible. And we see that customers who implement this make our jobs very, very hard, which is the goal, right? WAFs, web application firewalls. Yes, they do make a difference. No, it's not the end all be all answer. We also see WAFs doing a great job, whether it's something on-prem or in-line or round robin kind of with something like Cloudflare. They do a great job of identifying malicious probing. And it takes in general, it generally takes a lot of time or a lot of traffic to thoroughly evaluate and assess an application. And web application firewalls are pretty darn good, most of them, at determining this is legit traffic versus this is malicious traffic. More importantly, can give you visibility if somebody's really probing the environment. For the most part, with the exception of a few exploits and vulnerabilities, it is relatively easy to identify if somebody is probing your web application or mobile application. You can see a really huge volume of requests. And then we don't see enough manual testing. We wish we did, because very straightforward, very transparent, very genuine. Manual testing is where you're going to find those critical vulnerabilities. There is no automated scanning tool that can find and do things like parameter tampering or deserialization. It takes still to the day a human being to be able to evaluate and interpret the logic and the workflow of the application in order to better assess. Andrew talked about the top 3 threats and these certain things that need to be in sequence in order to exploit. AI, ML, it's not there yet. I don't think it'll be there for a while. Eventually it will be, but right now it's not. So manual testing is where it's at. All right, quick word on cloud. These are, obviously there's a direct correlation to application security in the cloud because, well, simply put, we're putting all of our applications into the cloud. Keep these things into consideration, all right? You look at cloud permissions and ACLs. Those are easy wins, right? We hate seeing when we find an S3 bucket and it has lack permissions and we've got access to all this data. That's an easy win, something that you can work pretty easily to remediate or identify. We talked a fair bit about the assumption of trust and security. It goes in line with the cloud. Do not assume that when you put an app in Azure or AWS or wherever, that they're protecting your application and that they're doing all the right things that they should be doing to protect your application. This is just another place you're putting your computers and your applications, and you got to make sure that you're doing all the right things. There are some cool features and functions on many of these different cloud platforms, but you got to investigate, you got to research, because a lot of these things are definitely not turned on by default. Insecure APIs. APIs have a number of different threats to them. I think about session management, understanding the intricacies of a token and how that token can be used, understanding that sometimes we see APIs that are publicly exposed that don't need to be. You could put the API somewhere else where it's only talking to the front end server and the front end app server and have that be the broker for the API interaction and then provide that data to the user interface upstream. We see, a lot with APIs in regards to like authorization, session management, authentication. Just keep in consideration, there are some good best practices out there to capitalize on. And then lastly, logging challenges. Yes, logging challenges in the cloud is an issue. It's an issue for incident response, for forensics, for legal, for compliance, and for good security. Understand that the XDR game and the SIM 2.0, we're really starting to make strides in getting correlation and connectivity between the cloud and all the other controls that we have, whether it's vulnerability management or EDR. They're all starting to understand we need to do something, and we're making good strides there. So, last but not least, what are our recommendations? Well, we talked about understanding business drivers, right? Before you embark on any journey or any, type of advanced testing, it's important to understand your organization's business drivers. What's our strategy? What's our short and long-term goals? How do we align security with these objectives and then articulate that information to the stakeholders in a language that they understand? What regulations do we need to comply with? These are things that will help drive your application security program. We talked about the definition of scope as well, right? We talked about the importance of understanding the full scope of what you need to achieve, in addition to inventory and understanding what's in scope and what's not, regulations, requirements, all these different things can play a huge part in again, the creation of your program. You got to look at the skills of your team, right? And it's important to understand that a lot of developers don't have the skill set that Andrew does, in that they can develop and they're a rock star pen tester, right? So understand the capabilities of your team, offset that where possible through other vendors or technologies. But first and foremost, understanding that you might have that OSCP or OSWE that you don't even know about that might be able to take a step up and look at things with that lens. You might not. And in that case, you should evaluate what are those best steps. And then test is needed. When we say test is needed, we'll talk about things a little bit more, but I generally see most organizations that are leveraging a really strong application-centric program, they're doing static testing, which is code analysis, right? And they're doing that at various early stages in the development life cycle. They're going to offset that as well with some dynamic automated testing, throughout the application life cycle. And then they're going to complement that with some manual testing. And that manual testing usually comes in, as the application is either under, development or shortly thereafter. And then post production deployment, any minor revision changes or major revision changes to that application should certainly warrant an additional manual test. So that was it. I love this conversation. It's good. We're pretty passionate about this stuff, as you guys can tell. I think we've moved to the Q&A portion of our discussion.
Yes, we did. By the way, my blood pressure just shot up by a lot.
We hear that a lot. We hear that sometimes.
I don't know about everyone else, but I see myself taking really deep breaths when Andrew's going through that damn password 123. That was my password in the very beginning. Oh my gosh. All right. So we do have one question, private chat question for Andrew specifically. This is a little bit long question. Andrew mentioned the concept of not over engineering. What is your approach for securing minimally variable products, MVP, innovation projects? How do you balance what review processes to enforce and at what critical points for these iterative projects with small targeted audiences?
I can go ahead, Andrew.
Well, if you got something, Sean, I can go ahead and add at the end then if you got something.
I think I understand the question. I want to make sure, it seems like there's a question in regards to some of these, MVP type projects that we're leveraging, and what processes do we leverage and when do we leverage those? And I think it's based on some of those unique business requirements that we mentioned earlier, in addition to regulatory requirements, right? From a best practice perspective, there's a lot of frameworks out there that will give you the guidance and information as to, this is when you should be doing testing, this is how you should be doing testing, and then this is how we map to those unique business requirements and compliance mandates. But I wish it were as simple as saying there's, you do it X amount of time and it's the industry standard, when you inject the process, and it's not. It's pretty dynamic for a lot of different organizations. Andrew, you want to comment on that at all?
No, I think that's exactly. It's harder to make that recommendation when you're not. A lot of it is the business risk tolerance as well too. What data you're trying to protect in there. All of those things are variables that you need to implement and take a look at. Having a good risk assessment process is great. You can figure out what applications need those type of checks and when they need those type of checks. I will say trying to fix something that is a vulnerability that is a lot more expensive to fix late in the process of development when it's being pushed out, as opposed to fixing it earlier on. So the earlier you can catch those, the better.
Okay. All right. So this is a question. This is more general question. Which apps are the most vulnerable that you've seen from a customer project perspective, engagement?
I would definitely say the homebrewed custom apps, the custom developed apps, apps developed by software firms that most certainly may not have security on the top of their mind. We got to understand it. It's in most cases with application development, it's a rush to production, right? It's all about getting out to production as fast as we can, but we're shifting that mentality and the culture and understanding the implications with security. As Andrew mentioned, it's a lot worse to deal with the vulnerability after the fact versus doing the right things ahead of time. So again, I think what's important is you work with, software development firms, asking them the questions, demanding that they show you attestation they're doing the right things, following the right framework. And then, make no mistake that, COTS-based applications, those off-the-shelf applications, they go through pretty consistent testing and have a little bit more of a, I think, mature framework established, but it doesn't mean that they're immune to vulnerabilities, right? But oftentimes you do see those off-the-shelf applications going through some rigorous testing as they're used by the masses in the millions, right?
At the end of the day, Sean and Andrew, I mean, it's always from a business owner perspective, they always ask for that budget and delivery date balance, right? So having that extra constraint and to insisting that they're gonna do that, I think that's important, right? How would you justify that? Justify that from a business budget perspective?
Well, we talk about the budget restraints a lot and the considerations of being able to test just enough without breaking the bank, right? But what we're also doing is we're leveraging security in a way that we haven't done before in incentivizing and building revenue. Right. So if I, as an organization, can demonstrate that we take security seriously, and these are, we can highlight that and showcase it and market it. Now we're changing the game, right? Now we're building revenue based on being secure, and those budget considerations or concerns, they're not alleviated, but they're offset in some way, shape, or form. Now that's not applicable for everybody, right? But in the situations where it's not, the budget constraints, 10, 15 years ago, Tony, it was really hard to demonstrate the value of security and testing. And I'll be honest, 15 years ago, it was a struggle to get involved in getting a customer interested in pen testing. Dramatic change now, right? The executives, the stakeholders, everybody understands that one little vulnerability in this application, or maybe one major vulnerability, can be detrimental to the viability of the organization, right? And so we see a little bit more stakeholder support there. Go ahead.
Especially if they're a public company, right?
Absolutely. We've seen plenty of examples there too. I'm not going to name any names.
All right. So another private chat question for you. How do I determine how often to conduct both automated and manual testing?
Andrew, do you want to tackle that one? You want me to? It's up to you.
I would say automated testing. I would do it every single release that you do, no matter how small of a change you make. I have some developers in my previous life when I was working in a different area where I had to make decisions on when I assess something. A developer would come up to me and say, "We just changed the images on this button. That's all we did." And I would say, "Okay, well that seems fair enough," and I trusted them, and that was not a good thing to do. So you got to put yourself deep into that software development lifecycle and put security in there. If I went through and tested the application after they deployed it, and they changed a lot more than that, and there were some critical vulnerabilities in there. So something that an automated scanner probably would have found it for that one. So anytime you can put it in there, it doesn't cost to do an automated scan, more than likely, depending on what product you go with. As much as you can, I would do automated testing. Manual testing, any kind of big deployment to production, I would definitely have checked out. Any kind of significant change, and I can't quantify that, but significant changes always lead to some issues. I've seen some significant changes where they say, "We just upgraded this library to show the table differently. It just looks a little different." That's not a problem, right? But we went through and tested that one, and we had some very critical vulnerabilities. We were able to access the backend database and application server from there. So just how they implemented that one library caused them issues. So any kind of big significant change, even if the developer tells you shouldn't be an issue, I would do some manual testing.
This is just off the cuff. Andrew, when you look at an application and you look at the data that's being rendered back on the screen, can you already tell? I'm just joking with you. Yeah, I get that.
Well, you know what? You can sometimes when you
sometimes
see
you can.
Yeah, you could go, I think I might have fun on this one.
Man,
yeah, here's a great little example, like the forgotten password logic. Everybody's familiar with the forgotten password logic. This is super simple, trivial, but with user enumeration in mind, if I enter in my email address to a forgotten password page and I click submit, sometimes the application will respond back and say that user does not exist on our system. That's bad, because now we can cycle through all these usernames and identify user. That's a great early sign, like, oh, we might have fun on this one, you know?
All right. Hey, we have one last question. What are the best practices for getting the API security in order?
For getting API security in order?
Yes.
I'll let Andrew compliment me on this one because he's probably a little bit better positioned. But the bottom line is, I think authentication and session management are two main components you need to worry about, as well as authorization. Understanding how tokens are used, how they expire. I think there's benefits in leveraging like OAuth or OpenID technologies to alleviate some of those authorization, I shouldn't say alleviate, to help strengthen, so the consumer isn't giving their credentials, but instead of tokens provided by a third party. Access control and authorization, making sure that some of the same things that Andrew mentioned apply to APIs. Parameter tampering is an example, right?
All right, quick summary. Andrew, we'll go with you for a 30-second recap, and then Sean for close. Andrew.
Oh, mine's easy. Mine's going to be the whole deck is don't trust your users. Add that extra few seconds in to put some checks in to make sure that any parameters that the user can return back to you is valid. Never trust what they're sending back to you.
And mine is more strategic, looking at the plan, and as you begin to think about how you're going to address this major, endeavor, look at what we talked about: the inventory, the prioritization, the building of risk quantification before you start putting the cart ahead of the horse. So,
well, thank you so much, Sean and Andrew.